Hello. Welcome to Atypical Dikkate, a conversation podcast. I'm your host, Soumya, and in this podcast, I talk to fellow queer, neurodivergent, and disabled folks. Why? Because I want to. This podcast is a way for queer and disabled folks to take up space according to our own terms. Today, I have Pranav, who is a super cool friend of mine. Pranav is a cat lover, a real one. They are a queer, disabled, non binary person with a wicked sense of humor that they developed from continuously struggling to survive in a neurotypical, sexist, and heteronormative society. They are also an educator and trained facilitator of gender, sexuality, and disability, and primarily works with children on these topics. In their free time, when they are not anxious about their past or future, or about the fact that one color from their color box is missing, they like to dance to Doja Cat's music. Hello, Pranav.
Hello, hi.
Hi, how are you?
Doing good, doing good. It's great weather here. I'm in Delhi, and yeah, the weather has been super kind today. So, and that's sort of was unexpected, but it's been good. Yeah, so I'm quite happy today, actually.
That's good. You sound happy as well. Just to, give a brief to the listeners, this is the second time we are recording this. We tried to record it in the evening one day. And because this is the wedding season and people started bursting crackers in my locality, and me being a neurodivergent person, I got overstimulated. And then, like, I was, fumbling around, like, when should I fix this? Because there were some other things that I was juggling with. So, yeah, I'm like terrified of uncertainty, and that's how crippling the whole experience was until I got the time and then rescheduled this recording. But yeah, have you experienced things like these, Pranav?
All the time. Like, I mean, for me, for me, it's and this is something which I started recognizing very recently. Like, I didn't know that this was happening to me, and I was just going through these experiences. I'm like, oh, I am not able to like do this properly or do that properly, and that's only very recently I realized that there's like lack of structure and any change in the structure, or any information that I already have and that has changed, like, just bothers me a lot. So, and then when I really got to know that it's my neurodivergent brain that needs certain sort of support, and then when I started giving him, I'm just able to perform and like function better. So yeah, happens to me all the time, like literally all the time.
Yeah, I know, right? Like you just feel stuck. Like if there is a meeting, I have to do 10 other smaller things in order to be prepared for that meeting. And until that happens, I am just stuck. I can't do anything else.
Totally agree. Like, even today, like when I was about to do, so this is for the listeners. So we were supposed to meet at a certain time, but I just realized that I, like, mentally I need to like still fix a few things, and I will take like 20 minutes to actually do it. So I texted Samya and I was like, hey, can we please move this by like half an hour, in exactly half an hour, and I'll be there exactly at that time. But I do need that, just that half an hour extra to like figure things out around me and come to the space where I can like fully function. And I think like it just like, I know, like if I had started, like if we had started half an hour ago, I know I would have been in a different headspace, because I was like, acha, this is not sorted, this is not sorted, all of those things. But yeah, and the fact that you understood that and you were like, yeah, sure, definitely, it's like that is the world I want to live in, honestly.
Exactly, right? Like these are the accommodations that we need. Like even in a day, we need different things, right? Our needs, they kind of shift. So yeah, totally agree on this. And in your bio where you mentioned that if that one color is missing, you'll be anxious about that, and that's so relatable. Like the
Mm-hmm.
other day, my mom kind of like moved the coaster on my table. Like
Hmm.
there's this fixed spot where my lamp has to be there, my bottle
Right.
has to be there, the air conditioner remote has to be there, my phone, my laptop, and my coaster.
Yeah.
So I need that structure, and that just
100
allows me to function. So
100%, 100%. I agree. And like, I think even in my bio, when you mentioned like Doja Cat, right? Like, I was just thinking about my playlist. So I have I think around only 8 or 9 songs that I just keep listening on the loop because I'm just not ready to listen to any new music. And the way I discover music is only when I hear it somewhere else once, and then I'm like, and then I'll sit with that song for the next 8 months. That's how music happens for me. And somehow, like Doja Cat for me is like it's been like I've been listening to the same set of 8 or 7 songs from one of her albums for the past 1.5 years. So I mean, all these things, like when we talk about, I'm sure like a neurotypical brain that is listening to this right now, a neurotypical person must be like, what are they talking about? Like, why is it so difficult for them to like, why to get bothered if the coaster is here or there, or if why not listen to new music? But how do we explain?
Yeah, I mean, these are my safe songs. Like, I also listen to very specific songs. I mean, the lyrics hold emotional value, the songs hold emotional value, and I can listen to the same song on repeat, on loop for hours together. And that's also a form of stimming for me, like self regulating behavior when I am anxious or overwhelmed about something. It just soothes my nervous system. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, not many people get it. I remember this one particular time when I was, I think, in seventh grade or something, and one of my cousin brothers, he was like, why are you listening to the same song?
Yeah.
And I had no idea or no answer then, but today I know. I mean, it just helps. I don't know, sameness just helps me ground myself in this world which is so unpredictable.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
definitely. And I think for us, what happens is like there's just so much information, and then we process it in a certain way, right? And different than how neurotypical brains would do it. And when we go out in the world, or even just day to day functioning, we realize that if I'm not able to predict what's going to happen, it just bothers me a lot. And I think that comes down to something as simple as listening to the same song, knowing that this is what the lyrics are going to be like, this is what the sound is going to be like. And these things are just important. And like, fun fact, by the way, this is very recently I realized that people don't do this. I thought everyone has like, oh, they have this one playlist that they listen to and then whatever. And I realized people are discovering music on a daily basis, and I was just shocked, and I was like, how are you doing it? Like, how are you listening to new music? Like, how's that mind working, and for me, that is like how neurotypical would look at us, and they'll be like, oh, this is a strange brain. For me, I look at neurotypical people and I was like, that's a strange brain. Like, how they functioning.
Oh my God, I know, right? It's the same
Yeah,
for me. Like every day something is coming up and people are getting hooked to it, and then I just can't. I just still
yeah,
keep the same playlist. Even shows, even clothes, even food. Like I know
everything, everything,
everything. Oh God, this is so
everything.
relatable.
Everything. Shows also, like, so many. Like, I just keep going back to, I will start from after finishing the final season, I will go back to first, but I will refuse to start a new show unless and until, and something I think about, like, then what is it like that makes me, it's not that I don't explore new shows, I just do, the frequency is much less, but I am also very curious to know like what pushes me to actually see the new show. And then I was just doing like sort of reflection and trying to understand like what pushes me to see something new is I is when I realized is something from the show still feels familiar. So I recently started watching this new show, and there was a song which I had heard before, and that song was like sort of a segue for me into, just that was it what pulled me into watching the show. So there was still some kind of familiarity. Hi, dyslexia. Yeah, that sort of like pushed me to watch that show. So yeah.
No, this is so validating and so relatable. But yeah, like nobody gets it when I say that I kind of like certain textures or like, certain types of clothes.
Yeah.
So yeah, like as a child, my parents would often tell me, like, don't have your mind blocked.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
mean, it's just an unpredictable world, and these things help me, ground myself. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah. True. True.
Actually, I wanted to ask you something,
Mm-hmm.
you are an educator and trained facilitator of gender, sexuality, and disability, and you work with children. So,
Mm-hmm.
how has that experience been like, especially with children?
Right. Like, so. So, quite interesting actually. Like when I started doing this work, I was doing it for adults. And one day, so back then I was working with a social organization that, works in government schools. And one of the teachers who was part of our organization asked me to do something similar. I had done a gender sexuality module for the adults there, and they asked me to do something for the children, for the students, and I was like, okay, that's interesting, so let me try it out. And yeah, and I thought it was going to be tough because these topics are, slightly complex. You have to get into the depths of it and all of those things, and I didn't know if children will be able to comprehend. I knew that there's a need to talk about these things for sure, but I didn't know how to do it really. And then after whatever research I did and all of that, I realized that I can actually use pretty much the same modules. But here's the thing, like the difference here was like how it was received. And what I realized is like children are just so amazing. They are so open to listening to new worldviews. They are open to exploring things. They're open to questioning things and change their views if they don't agree with something. And honestly, the experience has been great because I feel like it's far more easy to work with kids than it's with adults, because adults by the time they are adults, they have sort of cemented a lot of ideas, and they so strongly believe that even if there's an evidence that goes against their idea, they are not ready to take, like, get rid of that idea. And with kids, it's like, oh, now this sounds like a fact, and we'll just accept it, right? At the same time, they are so authentic because they are quite innocent in some ways, and they are so authentic. So for them, understanding, like, say for example, if I was to give them an example of a gay couple, for them it's not about, oh, two men together, how does that look, all of that. For them, they were like, oh yeah, okay, this makes sense, like two people love each other, isn't that what love is supposed to be? And they are together, and I was like, okay, that was easy. Yeah, that happened. So for me, it's been great. And I think since then I have been like pretty much working only with kids. And I think every time I go inside the classrooms and talk to kids about these things, it's just been great. So what I also realized is that I stay away from all the labels. I don't get into the labels. I don't get into the semantics of it. But I definitely do talk about feelings and just talk about being authentic and genuine. And I think, and it works beautifully.
Yeah, we often say that, how do we initiate these conversations without using the words, because these are stigmatized and these are sensitive
Hmm.
topics.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that definitely makes sense. How do you create, such a safe and inclusive space with children when you talk about these issues?
Right. Like, I mean, for me, creating safe spaces is, it's just telling them at the beginning of the session that this is like the intention of the session, this is where we are heading, and I also want you to participate equally. So there's like no power dynamics. I'm not your facilitator or your teacher or somebody who's an adult in the room. We're just going to have an open discussion, and it's only through discussions that we explore things. Say for example, I remember I was in one class where we were just talking about an example of a doctor and a nurse and everything, and of course gender roles came up, and they said that they imagined doctor to be a man and nurse to be a woman and all of that, and then there was no mention of other genders and all of those things. And we just had a very casual basic discussion around, why do we think that is, why do we think that men came to our head when we thought of a doctor, or a woman came to our head when we thought of a nurse. And it was just discussion between each other, uh, that that just made it like, it was just such a free flowing discussion. So it just worked out really well. Like, I mean, they were able to just come to the point that gender roles really suck, and there's somebody who's already decided, and they decided to start recognizing these things. So that happened.
By the way, do you ever experience any sort of pushback when you approach educational institutions or teachers? Because that is it's still like considered a taboo, right? So, has there ever been pushback regarding like sensitization sessions of this sort?
Yeah, of course, all the time actually. And it's not the kids. When it comes from the pushback has come from either parents, or it has come from like senior members in the school. Like, the reason like why I'm able to get inside school is only because there's this one teacher who wants to really do this session, or like this one department which is really really wants to have these sessions in their schools. But apart from that, all the other senior members, basically all the adults in the school, they're like, we are not too sure. And I remember like talking to a principal before doing the session, and they were like, acha, like you talk about all of these things but don't talk about these things. And I was like, why I'm not supposed to talk about these things? And they were like, they are kids, it's not for them, this is something that it's a choice that we make as an adult. And this was with respect to sexuality, sexual orientation specifically. And I was like, you know what, like then I realized that, hey, you know what, I'll do the session with the kids later. Why don't we sit first and talk about these things, and let me take you through what the modules are like, what are the things we're going to talk about, and if you feel that these things don't make sense, then we'll not do the session, right? And so whenever I enter a school or whenever I'm working with a group of students, my first approach is always to have a session with the parents and then have a session with the teachers, and then actually move on to kids and students from that school, because the kids will also come back for question, like they'll have a lot of questions after the sessions, and the parents and the teachers should also be, they should have enough knowledge to actually be able to answer these questions. So that's been my approach. So start with the adults and then come to the students. And it's not because students won't understand, it's because I've just figured out a way to create a structure that works well without getting the pushback.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you also work on disability, right? Given that school can be pretty ableist and exclusionary, right, for
Hmm.
neurodivergent and disabled kids.
Hmm.
And also it's so normalized, right? If you kind of like, if you fall down or something, the usual response that you get is, "Oh, are you blind or something?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And then if a kid is like kind of hyperactive or something, or a little slow, you use all sorts of like ableist
Right.
terms. So how do you have this conversation with kids, because again, like, they kind of imitate whatever they see, because teachers use these terms as well for kids when
Right.
the kids don't perform according to their expectations. So how do you initiate these conversations about language, about ableism in general with kids?
Right. So, to be extremely honest, here's the thing. Like, I have not been actually able to talk to kids about disability the way I would like to do it, only because I get very limited time in schools and we are just asked to do certain topics. So, and this is where I realized the problem was, and there have been so many times I've done like a lot of research and I designed a beautiful module around beautiful like khud ki tarif, but like a really good module around say disability, and how do we talk about neurodivergence, how do we talk about atypical brains and all of those things. And then I go to schools and schools are like, we don't have kids who are disabled, that's usually their response. And then they're like, we don't actually, we have this one kid who is a wheelchair user. I mean, for them the idea of disability is so different. Like, I mean, it's restricted to one physical disability, and even in physical disability there is only a certain type of physical disability that they look at, right? And so whenever, but I definitely want to talk about these things, so I do talk about like stereotypes, I talk about what are the words that we are using, can we examine the words. Sometimes we sit and break down the words, sometimes we do these group activities. But that's been a real problem, and I think like, and precisely why, like, my the modules that I am now in the process of creating, I want to integrate disability very slowly into it, because there has been a pushback for this. And it's and isn't it funny? Like, I mean, there are schools which are like, oh, chalo gender sexuality pe aap kar lo session. Yeah, talk about queerness, talk about these things, talk about whatever, very important. They recognize the need, they understand why it's important, all of those things. But when it comes to disability, there's a very different kind of ignorance that exists. And at this point, I think I'm just like a little, I mean, I don't know, fascination is the term, but I'm just a little fascinated. I'm not surprised, but I'm just like, what is happening? So yeah.
I kid you not, you are my third guest, and all three of my guests so far have pointed this out. Like, the idea of disability is just physical disability, for the society, the one which they can see.
Hmm.
So there's clearly a hierarchy over here when we talk about disability. What got you interested in working, on these intersections with children? These are not easy topics, especially,
Yeah.
even with adults. So
Yeah.
children, so what got you interested working on these intersections with children?
Right. So basically my life, right? Like what happened is like growing up, I first, understood that there is sexual orientation that I have to look at, that I realized that it's a non-normative sexual orientation that I have. So I had to figure that out. Then a few years later, I realized that, oh, maybe I do have a neurodivergent brain, and that's when I started thinking about neurodivergence, and that happened. And then when I was like, I'm done with all of this, like, I figured it out. And then comes like gender, and then there is like non-binariness, and then I'm like, okay, this is a lot, right? This is a lot for one person to handle. And then taking all of this together, going back, reflecting, introspecting, I realized that I always lived at that intersection of gender, sexuality, disability. And one of the reasons why school was extremely tough for me, and of course, like when I was in school, I was like, okay, I'm just like a kid who who is experiencing school as perhaps all other kids are. But like growing up and having seen, like being in the education sector also, I realized that wasn't the experience of most people. That was experience of very very specific set of people, which included me. And I'm like, and because I am also very very passionate about education in general, and I'm like, this is a very big systemic problem. It's not the problem of identity, it's not the problem of location, it's not any other problem, but it's a systemic problem. It's just everything together is just literally working against identities which are intersectional, right? um and that just made me think that, what is it that I can do for this, right? Like now at this point, I am 28 years old. I have the knowledge, I have the resources, and I also just work very closely with the education sector. So it's like, okay, what are the things that I can do? What are the things that I can change? What are my skill sets that would work? And that's why, so I mean, in a way that it comes from it, I don't want to call it like a selfish thing, but it comes from a lot of introspection. I just don't want any other kid to experience the way I experience school. And I always keep thinking about the idea of rest, right? Like when in disability we always talk about the idea of rest, and I realized that the idea of rest also extends to being a non-binary person, or to being a queer person. And there is never rest. We are constantly fighting the normative system all the time. And I was like, when will I rest? And in school there are already so many things happening. You're growing up, hormones are there, people are there, teachers are there, all of these things are there. And uske upar se, on top of that, we have to literally like fight the normative system. So I just don't want, I just want to change things for the kids, in whatever capacity I can do, for kids who share a similar identity. So that's where the passion actually comes from. Yeah, and even if like one life is one kid is able to feel comfortable with their identities in that school, I think I'll be happy. Like, yeah. So so that's where it comes from. But yeah, that's it, I guess.
This is so relatable, I tend to do my activism to the point of burnout because I'm
Mm-hmm.
constantly like, fighting. I want to change this, I want to change that, because I
Yeah.
have lived those things and
Yeah.
I don't want these things to perpetuate. And sometimes I can't even stop.
Yeah.
Like, I'll need a break, I'll want to take a break, but I'll see something which, triggers a lived experience of mine, and then I'll, jump headfirst into it. So I
Hmm.
don't think I have rested in a very long time when it
Yeah.
comes to, because all of these discussions, even when you do with those around you, this includes labor, right?
So
And
much
it's
labor.
draining. But
It's true. Yeah.
yeah, I think I need to teach myself how to stop sometimes. Like in disability justice, we say even rest is resistance, right?
Exactly.
So when I started this podcast, I was like, these conversations that I have with fellow disabled, neurodivergent, queer people,
Mm-hmm.
these
Mm-hmm.
are validating for me. This is my
Yeah.
form of rest.
Yeah.
Even if I'm doing activism through this
Yeah.
is rest for me. This is building
Yeah.
a community. I'm
Yeah.
building queer disabled intimacy through this. And I enjoy these conversations because they
Yeah.
are incredibly validating.
I
Yeah.
completely agree with you, and I'm also thinking like also at the same time, like while even for me, like when I'm talking about these things and I'm having a conversation with a fellow neurodivergent person, and we're just getting just sort of validating our experiences. At the same time, I feel like while it is, and like I mean this is just my perspective, and like I'm also thinking that I think sometimes rest and lack of rest exist together, right? Like even though we, like say even this podcast for that matter, right? Like this does help us understand who we are and all of those things, and it is very validating. But at the same time, we are still talking about these things only because we still are fighting the normative structures, right? And this is what I think, what say cis people, or men, straight men, or you know all of those who are in power, what they fail to understand is like they don't have to think about these things, right? So even when they're actually resting, sometimes that rest is also not rest, because you will, I don't know, I really don't know that, that's the question I have, like when do we rest? Can we actually rest? Because everything around us is makes us non-normative, because of which, just order to survive, and I'm not even talking about thriving here, but just order to survive, we are constantly like functioning, like we're constantly like operating, we are doing something or the other. Just existing itself is like lack of rest. So I don't I really would, I really hope that there is some place, some form where we can truly rest, what I mean.
Yeah, totally. I mean it might sound very silly to a neurotypical person, but especially during the burnout, I'm constantly hearing this ringing noise in my ears. It's
Hmm.
called tinnitus, right? So
Hmm.
I have it, but now it's just aggravated. So I'm
Hmm.
constantly hearing, and it's not an outside noise, but you know, I'm just hearing it, and the only way I can drown it is by hearing my safe songs on, full
Hmm.
music.
Hmm.
So even explaining these things, and on top of that, if there's some construction work or firecrackers or lift, the noise from the lift, it
Yeah.
just leads to a meltdown, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when are we resting exactly? Because you're constantly trying to survive in this world. Forget thriving, you're
Yeah.
just constantly trying to survive. Yeah.
All the time.
I know we talked a bit about like your schooling experiences, and offline also. We have talked about you navigating the educational system with learning disabilities. Could you tell us a bit more about those experiences, and like how was it like in school? How did you navigate? How did you realize and affirm these learning disabilities? How has the journey been like in adulthood?
Definitely. So so like I remember, as long as I remember, like I mean I think it all started with me being a lefty, like, and this has nothing to do with like my learning disability. It's just me being lefty, which already made me like non-normative, right? So I was already outside the system, and that's how literally my schooling system like schooling journey, whatever, started, where like teachers are coming and telling me, "Hey, why are you using your left hand and everything?" So anyway, confidence wahi khatam ho gaya tha. So confidence was over there only, with respect to how I am presenting myself. And then like much later, and this is basically my entire school life, but like it is like, a few years ago in retrospect, I realized like I always had a learning disability. Recently I realized perhaps I have two, or maybe three. And like how neurodivergent brains are, there's like never a clear answer of what a neurodivergent brain is. So like all these, again, at the end of the day, all these labels and all we talk about, it's far more complex than it looks. Anyway, coming back, so basically, I like, for me, schooling was difficult in terms of just learning, like just able to process information. How do I process information? How do I take that information that is there in the book and take that and put it in my brain, right, and store it? And for the longest time, obviously, like, because while I was growing up, I was taking help of like either my parents or taking help of my tuition teacher, or teachers at school, or whatever. They all had a very specific way of teaching, and which was the normal way of teaching, which is like they write, you read, you understand, and that's it. I'll and another thing was like my handwriting. Like everyone like was just behind my life to change my handwriting, and they would be like, cursive mein likho, cursive mein likho. And I'm not able to understand my own writing, and that was the problem. I did not write not in cursive because my handwriting wasn't good, and they were like, you need to have good handwriting. The problem was I was not able to read my own handwriting if I write it in cursive. And it's much later I realized that I don't write in cursive now anymore. I have these very block letter sort of handwriting, only because like my dyslexia doesn't allow me to understand cursive. It's like everything gets mixed up, and again, like the representation of when words get mixed up is not exactly how they showed it in like the Bollywood movie Tare Zameen Par or anywhere else we have read about dyslexia. It is just uncomprehendable. Like you can't comprehend what's written, and that was what my journey was like. So imagine my main source of information is coming from notebooks which I have written in, and I'm not able to understand that. And obviously that did so many things to like, and I will come talk about the mental health aspect of having a non-normative life, maybe perhaps later in the podcast, or perhaps there's like an entire episode for that later. But the fact being that I was not able to understand my own handwriting, and those things were happening. And it's only much later, when I became like slightly older, when I was able to control the way I would learn. This was around in 10th grade. So I basically scored really bad from the beginning. Like I was not a good student. I mean, their definition of what a good student is, I was not a good student. I couldn't get good marks. And only because I just did not literally learn what others were able to learn. And only in 10th grade is when I was left by myself and I was asked to like study on my own. I developed so many different ways of learning, right? So I developed a way through storytelling. I developed a way through, I would literally be in front of the mirror and be like, I'm a news reporter and I'm reporting this news, and I would like talk about an entire history lesson. And that's how I started learning. And then I realized like I'm a visual thinker. Images help me learn, and I scored really well in 10th grade. And that's what I decided, that this is the way I'm following. But it took me so many years, and I'm not going to even talk about like the what it did to my self confidence when every time a teacher, or even like within my family, I had members who were studying better, who were doing better, who were getting better, much better grades. It does something to your self confidence. It does talk about um, how you are as a person in that particular space. And yeah, it took a toll on me. But coming back to like adulthood, one day I decided, you know what, like I know I have a disability and I am gonna figure it out. So I like, firstly, kahan figure out karo, where do I figure it out, like what do I do? I did Google, blah blah blah, found a doctor, saved up a lot of money, because it does take, so nobody talks about how expensive it is to be a non-normative identity. Like either you're queer, trans, you are a neurotypical, neuro divergent. Everything just costs money because you're working against the system. So obviously, I had to find like a doctor who would help me, do these assessments. And the assessment came out, and the assessment basically said a possible yes or a no. And I was like, what is the point of the assessment if it's a possible yes or a no? How does this make sense? And then I studied, and which I should have done before giving the test and paying a lot of money for this. Then I realized that most of these tests that are developed for, say, especially for learning disabilities like dyslexia or dysgraphia, are made for younger kids, right? By the time you are 18 or you are above 18, and I took this test when I was like 20, whatever, assessment when I was 26. So by the time I had already developed mechanisms to sort of overcome the challenges that my dyslexic brain would have or would get. So what happened is that I could not, like, the even the test got confused as to if the brain is dyslexic or not. um, and and then that's when I was like, I know there is something, but this test didn't give me the answer. And then that's when I actually started getting into disability rights and started reading more about it, met disabled people from like all the parts of the world through like thank you internet. So that happened. And that's when I realized that, I don't need a test to say that I am neurodivergent. I know I'm neurodivergent. And a lot of people are actually neurodivergent, right? And there is no test that can actually validate that, because neurodivergent doesn't work the way we think it works. It's not like you get 8 out of 10 in a certain test and that's what will make you dyslexic or dysgraphic, but it is 4 in this, 5 in that. Like a little bit of ADHD is present, a little bit of dyslexia is present, a little bit of depression as a disability is also present. Like all of these things, that's how brain works. And that's the journey I was on for the longest time, and now I'm at like a place where I sort of understand who I am as a disabled person, as a neurodivergent person. Yeah, but it was tiring. It was so tiring. So that.
No, totally. This is like so relatable. Remember when we were like kids or like, young adolescents, there was this Apsaraka ad, extra marks for good handwriting. Like,
Yeah,
can you
yeah.
imagine, perpetuating stuff like that?
Oh my God.
Why would you do that? And then, even handwriting, like, why is that the only way, the right way to do things? I do not understand. Back then,
Yeah,
I just did it because that was cool,
yeah,
and you had to do certain things because I didn't fit in, right? So
yeah,
these were the sort of validations that I sought to, overcompensate for the lack of, feeling like I belong somewhere, especially among peers and stuff.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, why would you like, even like there were ads like that, it's just so ableist.
So ableist, so ableist. Like, uh, the. I mean, now at this point, I think and look back, and I'm like, there are not like 100 examples, but like a million examples, which like literally were contributing, actively contributing to making my life as a intersectional marginalized identity worse. Right? Like, life is anyway bad, not because we are all against the system or whatever the structure, and then there are these ads which are just like, oh my God. And so many examples I can talk about, like an ad which attacked my sexual orientation, ads that attacked my disability, acts that, I mean, it's just endless.
Yeah, totally, totally.
Yeah.
Um, you were one of the first people that I actually like talked openly about self-identification, because I
Mm-hmm.
was also having this internal journey. That was my secret, figuring myself out, just like my sexuality or
Hmm.
gender.
Hmm.
So I was reading up a lot on autism secretly,
Right.
on
Right.
neurodivergence, and I know you were one of the first people with whom I talked about the importance of self identification. So, do you
Hmm.
want to tell us more about your thoughts on why self identification, self realization is important?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, self-identification, realization, self-determination. I think whenever we're talking about being of, and not just restricted to disability, but like any sort of marginalized identity, your experience is your experience. What you have experienced has nobody else has experienced, right? And that is such a fundamental, I think, has been like this fundamental force in my life that has just made me come to a place where I'm like okay with things, because that gave me the power to understand that, yeah, maybe what I am feeling nobody else can, and that's the truth, right? Self identification, or even self determination about, like, with respect to disability is precisely that. Like, your experience, and that your brain is neurodivergent. Like, you are a neurodivergent person. Your brain functions differently. And again, there, of course, there's no hierarchy, that neurotypical above or below or whatever. It's just a different sort of brain. um, and it is incredibly important, and I feel it's also so empowering. But when we realize that we can actually identify ourselves the way we want to, And of course, like, I know a lot of cishet people who are like the stupidest comment about self-identification, and they go like, oh, but what if I believe I'm this, and what if I'm a tree, and all of that. And I'm like, just what, like, what is happening? So anyway, so this is extremely important, and I think was a turning point in my life also, when I actually realized that all these tests, that or these assessments that we were talking about, are also made by neurotypical brains, right? So why is a neurotypical brain still, deciding who I am or how I will be? And then from that point onward, like, I just rejected the entire system, because even these assessments are part of that system. And there is, I don't think of, I mean, I don't think a test can actually, like, really tell who you are. I wish it was that simple, but it isn't. And neurodivergent is, like, I want to say complex, but it is. It has a lot of things, like, a test can't comprehend, like, put all these things together. So yeah,
People often tell me that, you overthink a lot. And I think overthinking itself is such a, huge marker of
yeah,
neurodivergent
yeah,
brains.
yeah, yeah,
It's like, don't even underestimate that. I'll go on like a full blown research to figure
yeah,
things out.
yeah,
That was what my journey was like also. So
yeah,
that is like one of the most neurodivergent things ever. Neurotypicals don't think so much, and they will
yeah,
immediately tell you like, oh my god, you're overthinking this. I
yeah,
mean, what
yeah.
is overthinking? What is too
What is
sensitive?
overthinking?
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And I recently read this somewhere, and I found it so interesting. And it was basically a neurotypical person telling a neurodivergent person, saying, oh, you are overthinking a lot. Right. And the neurodivergent is like, no, you are underthinking. Like, this is the standard. Like, this is how much one should think. And I was like, oh shit, yeah, that makes so much sense. Like, what if this is the standard? Like, it's only because how we see what the standard is. We think that neurotypical brains and the ability of their ability to think is like what thinking should look like, and anything beyond that is like overthinking. But what if overthinking was actually the standard, and every other neurotypical brain is underthinking? Imagine if, and that would, like, just this narrative would turn the table so much. And I would love to, I wouldn't do it, but I would love to go to a neurotypical person, and it's like, why do you think so less? Why do you not think? Don't you have the ability to think? Like, imagine if we start doing that, right? Or why are you not sensitive at all? Why are you so less sensitive? Like, what is happening? Like, who, what is over? What is over? What is the standard? Who's setting the standard? So yeah, just reminded me of that, and I thought that was powerful.
Oh God. um, I mean, if you do it, let me know how it goes. I would love to hear the insights on that.
Highly capable of doing it.
um, yeah, and now that we were speaking about, like the challenges which come when you are a neurodivergent person, so how do you navigate workplace as a neurodivergent person? Because it's so
Hmm.
uncertain, right? Even in school, you have some sort of structure. Like,
Hmm.
at least for me, that was what the case was. Like, there were routines, there were periods, you had like, this is the time for this, so that there was some kind of structure. But at workplace, like, you are just like left into the sea.
Yeah.
When you're on a
Yeah.
boat, you're on the sea, you don't know where you're going, so it's so crippling, most of the time. So how do you
Yeah.
navigate workplace as a neurodivergent person?
Yeah. So to be honest, I have been a little lucky when it has come to like workplaces and being a neurodivergent person at workplaces. Like I remember, like, because I work in the social sector, and for listeners who are not in the social sector, the work is very different from the corporate sector. Like, it is not, I don't want to say as structured, but it, like, I mean, you have a lot of sort of liberty in terms of like what you want to do, because it is a people centric job. But I have also worked in corporates where I had to like sign in at 8 a.m. exactly, and then I had to like log out at like 5 p.m., and all I had to do all of that. And I've been lucky because in both cases, both things were extreme, in the sense that like the jobs that I've had in the social sector were super liberal. So I actually had the space to create the structure, the day, the way I wanted. And when I was in corporate, it was super structured. Sorry, in social structure, social sector, yeah, it was super liberal, and in the corporate job, it was super structured. So which meant that I knew exactly what is going to happen at what time, and I was able to function there so well. In the social sector, because it's free, I was able to create my own structure and implement that. But of course, like, it has been also a challenge sometimes, like small things, like, say for example, if my manager calls me and he's like, you know what, I want to talk to you, can you book a meeting for 3 p.m. tomorrow? And that's it, like, that's the end of the phone call. And I am gonna freak out, and like, I am gonna spend my entire day thinking what the manager wants to talk about, right? What do they want from me? And this is what I think neurotypical people, if there was a neurotypical person, they would think about, oh, I'm not sure what the manager wants to talk to me about, but they would be okay with it. But I would get obsessively into it, and I'll be like, oh, did I do this? Did I do that? Blah, 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 blah. So I think navigating spaces in workplace like that has been difficult. With respect to, I think, noise has been, like, since the time since COVID happened and work from home was a possibility, I've been trying my best to either work from home or a place where I feel comfortable, only because I can truly work in such places, right? Because now I realize that going to office, talking to people, having so many people come in, go out, there's a lot of disturbance that's there all the time. And for a neurodivergent brain, I think it's very difficult to and again, like, every neurodivergent person's experience is different. For me, it was difficult because I can't work in a place where there are so many things that I have to, that asks for my attention, right? Like, and somebody who also has ADHD, it's like, for me, I wouldn't say, I just pay a lot of attention to a lot of things all the time. So for me, even when I'm doing one email, I'll suddenly move on to another tab because somebody on the other table was talking about something else. And then and that tab journey will be like 45 minutes later, 45 minutes long, and 45 minutes later I'll come back and I'll like, oh shit, I was actually writing this email which I totally forgot about, right? And explaining this to my colleagues could be has been challenging, even though, like, I've been super lucky, so that way it has worked out. But I know a lot of people who are in spaces where they don't have that option and have struggled. So at the workplace, it gets tricky. And the thing is, nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about neurodivergent. Nobody talks about neurodivergent people being so good at, like, creative thinking, so good at, like, designing new things, so good at, like, critically analyzing, filtering, reviewing things. But like, yeah, you can use those amazing things that neurodivergent people have to provide only when you actually provide the right type of environment and accommodation. So yeah.
Yeah, totally. And something which people were reluctant to do, providing hybrid work opportunities or
Hmm.
remote work opportunities. They started doing that during the pandemic, and but now sort of like people are going back to offices again.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't know, it just like I don't like it exactly. And there were so
Not a
many
fan.
disabled people who could work because of
Yeah.
those, um,
Yeah.
uh, policies. But I don't know what it's going to be like right now because most people are insisting, to come back to offices. But these are our rights, and these reasonable accommodations should be given.
Yeah, and I don't find any reason not to do this, right? Like, I mean, if anything good that came out of the horrible pandemic was one thing, that we got to know that there's so much work that can be done without actually being together or, like, seeing each other every single day and all of that. And a lot of people, of course, like neurotypical brains and other people, have this idea that nahi, we need to do this because we need to, like, have this whatever group environment and, like, team culture and building. And I feel it was happening even when during the pandemic. I think people were able to talk to each other. Of course, the scenario then was also different. But I think when people talk about inclusivity, diversity, and, having all these policies, I think work from home should be just a right. Like, people who want to avail that, and if that's not affecting their work, I think they should just be allowed to do it. Because I think most people are productive when they are in settings where they understand, especially disabled people. And I'm sure, like, a lot of listeners are just thinking about physical disabilities at this point when I'm saying disabled employees. But yeah, all sorts of disabled people, right? And I mean, and even small changes, like, just like, you remember the last time when we were trying to shoot this podcast, or record this podcast rather, I was just so happy when the camera was not on. And yeah, for the listeners, no camera is on even right now, because both of us are just not very comfortable with camera being on. And that, like, companies I know have policies where you have to keep your camera on if you're attending an online meeting. And I'm like, why? What is this obsession with looking at the face? Like, what more information are you getting looking at the background of the person? And this idea that people don't want to work is just so wrong. It's just a capitalistic idea. That people will. I mean, there have been research and one after the other where people are just more productive actually when they are able to work in the environment of their liking and choice and comfort. Yeah.
Yeah, and like eye contact is so intimate. Like I can do eye contact with like
Dangerous.
people. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like I can do it with safe people, but when I'm trying to actually listen, I
Hmm.
listen better when I don't have to do these things if I'm looking at something else,
Hmm.
because it just too intimate, and then I can't focus on the words or what the other person is trying to say.
Yeah.
So yeah, doesn't make sense.
Yeah, even the green light on the camera, like when the camera switches on or whatever light that comes on whatever laptop, it's just like, even if I'm not looking at the screen and looking at the people, I know that somebody has is constantly staring at me, right? And that's the feeling that I think I feel when somebody is just constantly looking at me when there's a meeting on, and looking at every other piece of information that they can gather from my frame. And I just find it so uncomfortable. So for most meetings, I keep my camera off. I also, because I handle like social whatever, I handle like public relations or slash partnerships. In most places that I've worked at, I have to like, I mean, that's the tricky part. Like, I am neurodivergent. I avoid social situations where that's literally my work. But I think that neurodivergence have also helped me build very strong and very genuine connections. So, I mean, there's no one definition of how neurodivergence works. But yeah, this camera thing is so real. Like, I hate video conferences.
Yeah, and it's said, right? If you have met like one disabled person, you have met just one disabled person. If you have met
Mm-hmm.
just one neurodivergent person, you have just met one neurodivergent person, because
Mm-hmm.
everybody is different, just like humans. Even like, these are not monolith categories. Like everybody is different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I have one last question for you. We
Mm-hmm.
spoke about all these intersections that you have lived with. So, how do these challenges, multiple layers of marginalizations, like they multiply, right? So,
Yeah.
um, and how has it been for you, navigating this when you are non-binary person in an ableist and cis-heteronormative world? In what way have they, sort of like multiplied? Either like in personal settings or workplace, what would you like for people to know about, so they are more aware of these intersections when they are interacting with people like us, basically?
Yeah, I think so much. Like, my entire life is just around has been, especially the past one decade, has been just around the amount of time I've spent one on just understanding myself. And now I've almost spent a decade doing that. And now I know, like, I'm spending perhaps another decade explaining it to others what I've understood with respect to all these three identities. And imagine, like, the amount of data. So then I'm talking about gender, I'm talking about sexuality, I'm talking about disability to everyone around me all the time. I think it's just being so tiring. And I just think that, imagine um all this energy, this is all the energy that I've spent in researching and figuring things out and understanding the world, understanding myself, and all of those things. Imagine all this energy I had just put in something else. I would have been a billionaire by right now. Like, I'm not kidding. I always think, like, the amount of energy that we spend, like marginalized communities, people from marginalized communities spend on just existing. What if they've and then what are these non-marginalized identities doing? Like, they have so much energy and nobody's talking about this equality of, like, say, energies in terms of just like body energy and like mental energy and all of those things. Like, imagine the amount of work that could have been done otherwise. Like, because if I was growing up and if I was in a world where being queer is not an issue at all, like everyone just is expected to queer and you actually come out straight, uh then I would have been like, I don't know, like probably started a business by now, had like, I don't know, like a Priyanka Chopra life. I don't know why I quoted that example. I'm so disappointed with myself. But but point being, like I would have just like done so many things. And I'm talking about all sorts of marginalizing identities, including like women who have to just navigate their life being women, and imagine if they didn't have to, they can actually put that energy in doing so much more. So coming back to the point is just the fact that it's just been tiring, and I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, why? Just a basic thing I want to do is just live and enjoy life, and for that I have to do all of these things. Yeah, like when do I stop this? When am I, like, even say for example, I also do art on the side, and then there've been so many times where I'm like publishing my art, and I'm sending it to like people, or I'm sending it to like whatever magazines and all of that, and they always say, oh, this is a queer artist, this is a disabled artist, and I'm like, I'm just an artist. And it's just like, can I, as much as I really like having these identities, because they help me navigate the world in a better way, and it's also a way to like sort of fight oppression. At the same time, I'm also very tired with these labels, because a lot of non-marginalized people don't carry these labels with them, and these labels have a sort of weight that you have to, sort of work with. So just that, I think I'm just like, give me like Glucon-D or something, because I'm tired.
Yeah, certain kind of expectations are also attached when these labels come up, and then you are also sort of invited to this specific kind of talks where you can only talk about these things. And yeah, like, I don't know, it's like these words help me explain myself, but I also
Hmm.
um, don't want to be put into a box by other people,
Exactly, as long as we are doing it, it's great.
because I didn't have the language to talk about these things. So now that I have it, it's empowering, but I
Yeah.
don't want others to do it. And then also, there are so many intersections and multiple layers. There's caste, there religious minorities. So the marginalizations, I mean, it's just when you are multiply marginalized, it's so damn difficult to
Yeah.
navigate this
Yeah.
world. And feminist labor is draining, all
Very.
kinds of feminist labor. And I just feel like even normal day-to-day conversations include a lot of feminist labor, and I have not reached that point where I have been able to dissociate myself. Like, my work is very personal.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's even more um tiring that way.
Yeah, for sure. Like imagine, and especially like for a lot of us who, and a lot of our friends that we have as well, who have been constantly working to change something about this world. Their personal life and their professional life both are the same thing, and I mean all the aspects of their life have this element that they have to continuously like sort of navigate with, engage with, and all of that. And I don't know if, and that's why we burn out. We burn out so fast.
Yeah, totally relatable. I
Yeah.
mean, even in this sort of like bittersweet sweet movement, I just feel a lot of validation right now. And I
Hmm.
think that is one of the reasons why I started this podcast. Um, so the conversations that I was having in private with people like me, I could
Yeah.
bring it out to the world so they can also hear and hold the space for these messy selves,
Yeah.
because we deserve to take that space, not just because we are inspirational or we are doing great things. Even our
Yeah.
rage, even our disillusionment,
Yeah.
trauma, everything should get space, especially when you are talking about feminist politics, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, no. I was just saying. I'm just thinking about the podcast itself, and I think it's such a great idea. And I'm just like just thank you for doing this, because like these voices need to be out there, need to be, just everyone just need to hear, just hear us out. At least that's the least you can do. Just sun lo hamari baatein, kya bol rahe hum. So yeah, thank
Exactly,
you for
for
doing
sure.
this. Yeah.
Thank you for taking out the time. And I know this is our second attempt, but yeah, thank you. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
so much fun, so much fun. And I really hope like we are also somehow find a way to actually record our, off the record conversations in certain way, because there's just so much. Like every time I think people like us, we are talking, I think something so beautiful comes out, and I'm just learning so much more. Like even I heard like the first episode of your podcast, and I was just like, wow, like there's so many things I can relate to, and so many things I learned also. Like there were so many things I did not know about, and I was like, yeah, this is precisely what we need. And so just thank you for doing this, and thank you for having me on the show. This was so much fun.
I'm glad. I'm like right now I'm going through my burnout as well, and I can't mask properly during this time. So I'm also
Right.
like starting out with people I know I have some level of comfort where they will understand me.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, thank you for understanding. Yeah. Okay, if you are hearing this message, you have listened to the entire episode. So, thank you so much for sticking around. If you enjoyed the episode and would like to support it, do consider sharing it with others, giving a shout out on social media, or leaving us a review. You can listen to Atypical Dikkate on Spotify. And if you want to reach out to me, your host Soumya, check out the Linktree link in the description. See ya!